Mr. President, we thank Vladimir Ivanovich Voronkov as well as Madam Gehrman for their reports on the activities of the UN structures to counter ISIL, which have been entrusted to them. We highly value their efforts, and we will continue to provide them with comprehensive assistance and support. The latest specialized report of the Secretary General observes the fact that the threat from ISIL not only remains present but continues to grow. Last month in the Council, there was an open debate at the Council on counterterrorism in Africa. Practically all participants expressed concern about the activity of fighters. This reaffirms the relevance and the global scope of the threats. We firmly believe that the victory in counterterrorism can only be secured if we pool our efforts. In word, all agree with this premise. However, in deed, the pooling of efforts is becoming a formidable challenge. The problem lies in an unwillingness and unreadiness of certain states to abandon their policies of double standards. They use terrorists for the attainment of geopolitical goals, including the ouster of inconvenient governments, as well as the creation and the maintenance of simmering hotbeds of regional instability. A host of Western states do not view terrorism as an absolute evil, and they do not embrace a policy of zero tolerance vis-a-vis terrorism. For them, this is a tool for the advancement of neo-colonialist policy on sovereign states and to ensure their own domination. For this reason, without pangs of conscience, they support, they finance, and they arm terrorists. For this is very convenient by their own hands to cultivate the terrorist hydra in order, under the pretext of countering this, to carry out military aggressions, armed aggressions against foreign governments, and to engage in long-term occupation of their territory. African states who have found themselves on the front lines of counterterrorism efforts now speak frankly about the role of Western countries in the emergence of this problem. This includes the deliberate subversive activity and the years-long alleged counterterrorism operations, which when scrutinized turn out to be mere imitations in order to justify the pursuit of foreign military presence, which have something that the populations have long been unhappy with there. In this connection, we have drawn attention to the appalling and entirely unsubstantiated conclusion which is contained in the Secretary General's report, which is under consideration today. Allegedly, one of the reasons for the expansion in the eastward expansion of the activity of the ISIL affiliate in the Greater Sahara is the counterterrorism operations of states in neighboring regions between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Nigeria. How is it possible, in principle, to blame states for efforts to counter terrorism and attempts to protect their own population from terrorist fighters? These similar conclusions cast doubt on the competency of Secretariat staff, the Secretariat staff who drafted the report. Instead of such conjectures, they would be well advised to study the facts related to assistance to terrorists in the Sahel provided by certain Western states and Kiev, who have effectively provided cover for the activity of terrorists and have prevented their liquidation. Ukraine has been providing drones and weapons to terrorists. Their authorities have directly acknowledged that they have been provided assistance to Al-Qaeda affiliates who carried out attacks on government forces in Mali. Ukraine previously had been used as a staging ground for foreign terrorist fighters, and now it has morphed into a logistics hub from where weapons, Western weapons, provided to the Kiev regime are disseminated throughout the entire world. These weapons fall into the hands of both criminals as well as terrorists. Ukrainian authorities are flaunting the carrying out of terrorist attacks as well as their links with international terrorist networks. Mr. President, terrorism has its root causes. They include armed conflicts, poverty, the weakness of government institutions, the lack of control over natural resources. We cannot overlook the fact that many of these problems are often a part of the grim colonialist legacy. However, there is a trigger which is often left unmentioned. That is NATO's invasion into Libya and the invasion into Iraq, which spawned ISIL. We believe it is important also to discuss the fact that the cultivation of fighters and the establishment of extremist ideology is often carried out by non-regional forces. They deftly capitalize on socioeconomic issues. They engage in distorted interpretations of cultural and religious pillars, traditions, and values. They exploit ideas of fictitious superiority or, on the contrary, historical grievances. In this respect, a terrorist international, including Al-Qaeda and ISIL, as well as radical common with radical nationalists in Ukraine. The latter, with the support of Western sponsors, have transformed into blatant terrorists, distinguishing themselves, such as the Azov battalion has done, and other national neo-Nazi units of the Kiev regime have done, with systemic crimes and against peaceful populations, terrorist attacks targeting the Russian Federation as well as targeting other countries. Against this backdrop, we are not at all surprised that the recent disclosures related to the activities of the U.S. aid agency. We have long spoken about the fact that it has been financing radical elements throughout the world. Just before, this was attributed to Russian propaganda, and ultimately, it all came out to be truth. Mr. President, the problem of weapons falling into the hands of terrorists is something which was not duly paid attention to in the Secretary General's report. And yet repeatedly during operations to eliminate ISIL, there were vast troves, there was a great deal of weapons produced by the West found in storage sites of the militants, as well as weapons manufactured in East European factories. Even Western media outlets have had sometimes publications crop up on the topic of weapons deliveries to the Middle East region. And we cannot overlook the situation in Afghanistan. The growing activity of ISIL Khorasan is no coincidence. NATO troops who hastily left Afghanistan, abandoned vast quantities of weapons and equipment, and this then fell into the hands of ISIL and affiliates. President, we stress the significance of and importance of measures for the return of foreign terrorist fighters from armed conflict zones, specifically from Syria and Iraq. As it is seen in the Secretary General's report, the existence of such camps as Al-Hol and Rosh in northeast Syria, with tens of thousands of people, including women and children, is fraught with violence and human rights violations. These camps are hotbeds of radicalization, and they are used by terrorists to recruit new fighters. A number of states have been referring to political and legal issues, and they continue to refuse to repatriate their own citizens. And this is the real root cause for human rights violations, which are mentioned in the report. We call upon all states to step up efforts to ensure the return of their own citizens, including both the fighters themselves as well as their family members. And at the same time, the paramount priority following repatriation is holding such citizens accountable for the crimes that were perpetrated. The Russian Federation welcomes and is committed to the task of the return of our citizens. We have already returned more than 500 people, including women and children, from Syria and Iraq. We have been prioritizing their rehabilitation and reintegration. Mr. President, turning back to the matter of double standards in counterterrorism, I wish to stress that this approach undermines international peace and security. We demand that Western countries demonstrate transparency, that they renounce selective approaches when it comes to counterterrorism. Nearly a quarter century has elapsed since the events on 11 September. At that point, the international community expeditiously closed ranks and managed to produce a comprehensive counterterrorism architecture. It is important not to bury that foundation, which was so painstakingly forged through concerted efforts. Thank you.